This is the Hope Not Nope podcast,
where we answer your questions and share inspirational stories to fill your soul with hope.
Our mission is to empower hope to those who have been plagued by nope.
I'm Dr. Dylan Caswell.
And I'm Brandy.
And we're here to bring you out of the nope and into hope.
Welcome to the Hope Not Nope podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Our question this week is from a listener named Kai, and he says, I saw your post on Instagram about the operational fitness test with the special operators that you work with. I'm a level 1 looking to pursue that career, but I'm concerned about shin splints. Any advice?
Ooh. Oh, so much advice.
So much advice. We
So
love
much
talking
advice.
about shin splints.
It just so happens that when you work with a particular population, there's common patterns that show up, right? So, for example, in football, the number one injury is hamstring strain. So if you're working that population, you have to dig into the research. You have to become an expert in that area on hamstrings because that's what you're seeing the most often, and you have to be ready to treat all the different types of it. Working with the military population, one of the highest rates of injuries that we see is this idea of shin splints. So it's something that we've really had to dive into the past 8 months to fully understand what is going on when a military athlete is having shin splints. What's the treatment protocol for it? And then most importantly, how do we prevent it from happening in the first place? So Kai, thank you for following us on Instagram. Thank you for submitting that question. We have a lot of advice into it. I'm going to start getting into it, and then Brandy's role is going to be pulling me back a little bit because we could do multiple episodes on this topic. So I'll try to hit the key points.
Well, before you start, I do want to say too that we have started a blog, which I think we had mentioned in previous episodes, but if we haven't, or if you missed that episodes, we have a blog on our website, hope.nope.org, and we have a lot of articles covering shin splints. And so Dylan's going to dive in. I might reel him back a little bit in case you guys have more questions that you want to ask. But if you're a listener and a reader, you can also head over to our blog, and I'll put it in our show notes as well.
Perfect. All right, so first step is that we need to understand what shin splints are. When we understand what they are, then the treatment methods and the prevention starts to make more sense. So to understand what shin splints are, we have to understand what they are not. And what the research has shown, and traditionally what was thought, is that shin splints are this injury from overuse of muscle tissue or fascial tissue. That these tissues are pulling on this thing of the shin bone called the tibia and creating this traction injury, which is irritating the periosteum of the bone. With that being the traditional thought, the treatment method then became, well, let's do soft tissue work, let's look at tissue flexibility, let's look at tissue compliance, and let's look at strengthening of the muscle that attaches in this area that we commonly are experiencing the symptoms of shin splints. So that common muscle is this muscle called the tibialis anterior. It's a muscle that kind of runs down the front of the shin and then wraps around, and its main role is to dorsiflex the foot or to lift the foot and prevent a foot drop from happening. So if you imagine your leg going through a swing phase, if your toes are pointing down, that's a foot drop. If you go through the swing phase, that leg that's in the air and the toes are pointed up, you're maintaining good dorsiflexion. So with that traditional thought of a shin splint, which is an umbrella term for a lot of different names that we'll get into, but generally when we hear that was a traditional thought. It's a tissue, it's a weakness, it's an overuse, it's a flexibility issue that's creating stress on the bone, and then it's the periosteum that's irritated that causes these symptoms. So soft tissue management, manual therapy, stretching, tib anterior strengthening. But what's the newer research say? What's the newer view on shin splints? The tibialis anterior, that muscle, it's only responsible for about 5 to 10% of the force in running, in marching, or in rucking. The calf complex, the triceps suri with the gastroc and the soleus, just the muscles of the calf, that compromises 60 to 70% of the force while running, rucking, marching. So what muscle group should we be looking at more than the other one, right? But also getting an idea of what's happening at the tissue from histological studies looking at the tissue. What the newer evidence has found is that shin splints are not a traction injury from overuse of tissues pulling on the bone like the tibialis anterior. What shin splints are, in the most specific kind, medial tibial stress syndrome, it is a bone stress injury. It is not a tissue, a muscle tissue or connective tissue. It is a bone stress injury,
Mm.
which means that when we have shin splints, we have to treat it as a bony stress injury. And there's fascinating research looking at a 4 week program, because how long does a bone take to heal? Anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks, depending on what else is happening in that person's life. But if we look at 4 weeks to 6 weeks, kind of branching that in the middle, that's how long it takes for a bone to heal. You could do nothing, or you could do something, and at 4 to 6 weeks, the bone will be healed and you'll be feeling better if you did rest. So this research looked at these other strategies of soft tissue work, manual therapy, kinesiotaping, scraping, tibial anterior strengthening, and then they compared it to a group that did nothing but rest for that 4 weeks. And we're not advocates of rest, right? But this is a condition that you have to rest that area because it's a bone stress injury. If you keep stressing a bone that's already stressed, what's going to happen? You're going to lead it into a stress fracture. We have to pull back, train other areas, decrease impact, such as running, jumping, marching. There's a lot of other things you can do to keep conditioning, biking, swimming. You can get strong in other areas, but we have to pull back knowing that it's a bone stress injury. The bone stress isn't to the periosteum of the tibia, it is actually to the cortex of the tibia. And this is where it gets really, really fascinating, is that the thought is that it's from impact that creates this stress on the bone. And yes, impact is part of it. We're not saying that it's not part of it. But the biggest stress that the tibia takes is during mid stance after the foot hits the ground and starts to move forward. The traditional wrong, outdated thought is that, well, the tibia anterior needs to be strong to advance the tibia forward over the foot. It doesn't have the force capabilities or the moment arms to do that. That ability to let the tibia come over the foot, that is from the calf, the triceps suri, that complex getting ready to push off the ground to push you forward. So what's interesting is that when that contraction happens, when the calves contract, it compresses the tibia a little bit further. It creates almost this slight bending or slight bowing of the tibia. When that happens, there's a shear force on the posterior medial tibia, which is the common spot where shin splints are. That repetitive shear force is then what helps to create the symptoms of the bone stress injury over time. So, from this aspect of loading, what makes sense? Well, one, progressive overload. Like we have to load up to the mileage that you're going to be required, especially going into like special operating or the special forces. Like you have to build up bone tolerance to that. It's like karate, right? Like if I go to break a cement block, I need to build up my bony calluses to have the bony strength to do that. I don't have that. So if I want to go smash a cinder block right now, my arm's going to be really sore and I'm probably going to injure the bone there. But if I've built it up over time by having some stressors and then recovering and then stressors and recovering where it becomes stronger, well, now I'm going to be able to complete that task. It's the same thing with rucking, with running, with marching, is that you have to build up the ability to tolerate and adapt to that stress. And we have to look at, well, what can prevent the shear force that is playing a role in the shin splint, which is calf strength and calf endurance. As much as that contraction can compress the tibia, it prevents the shearing force into the area that shin splints occur. So we've actually like historically been like, oh, tibialis anterior strength, get a kettlebell on your foot and do some dorsiflexions, get a band around your foot, do some dorsiflexions, and that might help a little bit. Like I'm not saying it's completely not worthwhile, but there's a lot of other things that we can address that this is like, it's an example of take care of the 99% before you take care of the 1%.
Mhm.
Like let's take care of those 99%. And that's load management, having progressive overload to allow the bone to adapt, and then having a good calf complex that helps to reduce the shear force that brings it on. And there's also fascinating studies of people looking at changing their running mechanics from being a hind foot striker to a forefoot striker, and that forefoot strikers have had success in mitigating the symptoms from shin splints. But there's two things in these studies. One, the people actually followed a progressive overload program. And then two, when you're 4 foot running, what muscle group are you using more when you are in a 4 foot strike? Your calf complex,
Mm.
right? So it's like, oh, I can change my running form. Or you can have progressive overload and have a stronger calf complex with better endurance, which will all in turn help you be able to do it. Because 89% of runners are hind foot strikers and don't have shin splints. So again, to me, it's not about like the running form or biomechanics. It's have you built up to it, and do you have the capabilities of the calves to help reduce the shear force that's happening at the tibia?
Mhm.
So wrapping that section up, and then I'll let you guide it into the next section, is that number one, this is a bone stress injury. It's bony resorption that outpaces bony formation. Two, it's not caused from the tibialis anterior or other tissues pulling on the tibia. It's caused from the shear force that happens during the mid-stance phase of running in combination with the impact forces. And then three, there's other factors that we haven't addressed yet that we will likely need to address in
Ooh.
this episode.
So what are those other factors?
So the other factors are, and this one has been, how do I say, just mind-blowing
Mm.
because it's so simple, but it's something that is so overlooked. It's what we really call the hidden cause of shin splints in military athletes. And not just military athletes, but I'm basing it off of that because that's where most of our work is.
Mhm.
And that's the question that Kai submitted was for the military. But we know shin splints happen in runners,
Mhm.
which, okay, running and military athletes like some similar types of demands. But here's the next question. We've also worked in performing arts with world touring performing artists. If you don't know what that is, theater, dancers.
Mhm.
How can this population have the same injury pattern as a military athlete? Because I can tell you from working with performing artists, they're not rucking 10 miles a day, carrying 100 to 120 pounds. So, how can this population have the same injury as a population that does have this amount of impact and the demands are very different, but they have the same injury? Well, what's the similarity between these two populations that people may have not have considered that we now have to consider? Caloric deficits.
Mm.
So performing artists are typically in a intentional caloric deficit because of the aesthetic appeal that's demanded in that environment. Whether we agree with that or not, it's not in this
Right.
conversation. It's just the fact of the matter
It's
is
the
that
reality.
to be in that career, you have to be a certain weight and you have to have a certain physique, and it's just you're on the road a lot, so they're in intentional caloric deficits.
Mhm.
But what about the military? Are they in caloric deficits? Yes. If we look at the caloric deficit that a candidate in special warfare school is in, they're in a typical caloric deficit of 1,500 to 2,500 calories per day, right? And now we advance that over 5 weeks, 6 weeks, keep expanding it out depending on the training. That caloric deficit adds up over time. So why does that matter? Well, it matters because this is a bone stress injury. If there's not enough calories in the system, the brain isn't worried about healing a bone stress symptom. It's worried about survival. And it has to start making choices and it has to start making hard choices. So it's not going to say, with the resources that we have, I'm going to go to heal that area. It's going to say, I'm going to use these resources to make sure that energy is going to the brain and to the vital organs so that we have blood pumping and that we can think because we have to operate at a high level in this deficit. So when that happens, what ends up occurring is that the bony resorption that's happening or the bony damage is outpacing the ability of it to heal. When we look at a caloric deficit, like how much of a deficit is going to put an athlete at injury risk, anything above a 15% caloric deficit. What is a caloric deficit? It's when your output, your energy expenditure, is higher than the energy that you're putting into your system. A calorie is a unit of energy. Like when you eat a calorie, like how many calories did you have? That's how many units of energy have you consumed into your body. And then different amounts are going to come from fats, carbs, and from proteins. But when you're in a deficit, it's that your expenditure is outpacing the input, right? So sometimes a deficit is intentional. And what is a healthy deficit? About 500 calories of a deficit, and then another 500 calories of output. So about 1,000 calorie deficit. Healthy weight loss is about 1 to 2 pounds per week. When we look at the deficits that military athletes are in, that is a higher deficit than what is considered to be healthy weight loss. When an athlete gets above a 15% caloric deficit, and then another variable that we look at is energy availability of how many calories per fat-free mass per day are available. And I won't share the calculation of how to do that. It will be in one of those blogs that are posted in this or on the website to see what that is. But the energy availability, when that number gets below 30, the chance of injury goes up. Caloric deficit or one of the symptoms of relative energy deficiency syndrome increases your risk of bone stress injury 2.5 times. So 2.5 times greater chance to have a bone stress injury, aka shin splints, if you're not being fueled, if you do not have enough calories. That is by far one of the biggest hidden causes of shin splints is being in a caloric deficit, not knowing that you're in a deficit, continuing to train at a high level. And I'll just throw this in there too, of if an athlete is getting less than 800 milligrams per day of calcium, their increased chance of bone stress injury goes up sixfold. So if you're in a deficit and in that deficit you're not getting calcium and vitamin D, you have a 6 times increase and the deficit 2.5 times increase. So you put that together, there's more of a likelihood that you're going to get injured than not because of nutrition. So now we have to combine the nutrition factor with the physical loading factor. And then the third factor is just overall metabolic stress. If I have high metabolic stressors and I'm not adapting well, my system is not going to help recover the area that is injured. I need ways to bring down my metabolic stress by having tools to adapt to stressors. That's why we created Reclaimed Athlete. That's
Mm-hmm.
why we do the work that we do is so that people can understand that if I'm fueled and I load appropriately, my metabolic stress is I have the ability to adapt to these stressors, then I'm going to be successful in whatever career field it is, whether it's the special forces, whether it's performing arts, whether it's distance running, like all those can be successful. So I'll pause there and see if that makes sense. Anything else that needs to be added into it?
No, I think from my perspective it makes sense, but we have had conversations about it prior to this, but I think you wrapped it up very simply of like looking at it kind of from a different perspective and but you also provided the weeds as well, which is awesome.
Yes, yeah. And the last thing I'll put in here too to kind of wrap up this segment is that um, we talked about nutrition, we talked about calories and being in a caloric deficit. You might be like, well, how do I know I'm in a deficit? Well, you have to know how much calories should you be
Mhm.
taking in per day, and then you have to track and see like what range are you hitting within that. And that could be a whole nother episode, so I won't get into
Yeah.
the weeds of that. But
I will say just like very quickly that if you do not track, tracking for a week alone might open your eyes to the reality in which you are currently at because we both have not tracked, but we thought that we were doing pretty well. And then we both tracked for a week and we're like, oh, this is not in the range of what our goal is. Now we need to make an adjustment. And luckily, neither of us have gotten shin splints or have had an injury. However, you never if you don't track, and I'm not a big believer in like tracking every day and like as someone who's recovered from an eating disorder, I think it can be harmful if you like over obsess about it. But for us, like tracking for a couple weeks just to see where we're at has been very eye-opening, and we'll just leave it at that because I
yeah.
think that we could have a whole other conversation about it. And if you have a specific question about it, feel free to submit it as
Oh, send
well.
it in because we'd love to talk about it. It's a
Hmm.
numbers game and it's a feel game. And
Hmm.
if you don't have the objective with the subjective or subjective with the objective, you're just guessing.
Mhm.
And like you want to know like how many fats am I getting, how much protein, how many carbs am I getting? And tracking has never been easier. Like it
Mhm.
has never been easier. And again, won't get into that because that will be a whole nother like
Yeah.
20-minute discussion. So I'll try to be disciplined and move on to the next thing. But I will say too, like, going into the military, depending on what branch that you're going into, some of the demands are pretty known at this point of how many miles are you expected to rock? What's the weight? What's your running mileage? What do your times need to be on the specific testing that they have? And now you can do that and reverse engineer your program. If you are going to go from 18 miles a week to 30 miles a week in 1 week, injury is going to happen.
Mhm.
Like we look at it and we know from Dr. Tim Gabbett's research on workload that we oftentimes don't want to double the workload.
Mhm.
Like that puts us at a 20% chance that injury could happen. Sometimes we have to push to that line because of time frames and when competition or when the school is coming up. But oftentimes not, we like to kind of extend it out, right? So
Mhm.
like if you haven't rocked or ran at all, like your weekly mileage is zero, like going to 1 mile that next week is a big increase.
Mhm.
And then if you go from 1 mile week 1 to 2 miles the next week, like you doubled the workload. So we have to be strategic in how we go about that and building up the mileage that's needed.
Mhm.
So if Kai, if you have an idea of like where you're at in your career, when you're pursuing that next step in the pipeline, like start planning out. Like this is what we do with our one levels. We have like a 22 to 24 week prep program to build up the appropriate mileage that's needed. And guess what else we're doing in that? Track your calories and show us what you're taking in so that we can examine this whole thing and give you the structure that's needed for you to be successful in this.
Mhm.
And not just like the one levels, but everyone that has a performance goal. Like, are you fueling for the performance that's needed at hand?
Right. And I feel like this kind of segues into my hope story and probably yours as well, but just like we've had a lot of great opportunities working with the special operators that we get to work with. And as Kai mentioned, we recently did their operational fitness test, which was just so cool. And like that's why we're there. We're there to help them succeed in this and prevent injuries and all of that. And I know Dylan will speak to it more, but just from my perspective, I do more of the admin stuff. I get to create, I get to, send out their newsletter and things like that. And I am present, but I don't necessarily get to work with the guys one on one too much, except for assessments here and there. But man, these guys are awesome. They're a freak of athletes. Like, it
Yeah.
is so cool to see what they can accomplish, like you said, in a caloric deficit with like high stressors in their life
Yeah.
and all these different things. Like, it is impressive. So impressive. And so, my hope story, very simply, is just like the fact that we get to work with these people, the fact that we get to see how awesome the human body is and how awesome just like humans in general are
Yeah.
and what like we can accomplish and the potential that we can achieve. And for Kai specifically, like go crush it, but do it with like the wisdom that we've shared and with the wisdom you've gotten from other people, because you do need to rely on other people and you do need to rely on the science and in some ways. But like if this is the path that you want to pursue, like go crush it, because it is awesome to witness from an outside perspective. And it's 4th of July week, and so like God bless America. This is
Yeah.
awesome. Like it's just so cool.
Yeah. It's really full circle for me. And I want to say this too of like learning from the science how the body was created and how it's designed. It is made to perform well. It is made to be as efficient as possible. We just have to understand that we need to not get in the way of that. And by not fueling appropriately, by not handling our metabolic stress well, by doing too much too soon or too much of the same thing for too long, we jeopardize that gifted ability that the body has to perform
Mhm.
and heal itself, right? Because like the whole thing of this of a shin splint being a bone stress injury is that it was stressed too much. It didn't have enough to recover. If you stay off of it for a little while and respect the bony timeline healing, it'll heal itself. And then you can use the science to go back at it and be a little bit more precise in prepping for it.
Mm-hmm.
And as Brandon said, it's just been incredible to work with these athletes, these tactical athletes, these special warfare officers, TACPs. And July 4th, it's my grandfather, my dad's dad, was a veteran. He served in World War II and then came back and graduated from the high school that I graduated, that my brother graduated from, that my niece and nephew will graduate from, and served in the military. And his birthday is actually on July 4th. I mean, he's passed, but like we still celebrate that July 4th. And I remember when we first started working with the military that my dad called me and was like, I wonder how much Bompa had a role in just like supporting this and helping bring it to it. And, so it's really cool for me every time to be there and be able to just kind of share in that in a very little way, because the sacrifice that these individuals make in the military is just unmatched. Like it's incredible. But oh my gosh, their athleticism is insane. To put it in perspective, right before recording this, I just got done working with a high level college athlete. Won't say the name because I need to protect it, but like a really high level college athlete. And I showed him the video and he goes, "Are you serious? They just did all that work in combat boots?" And that reel's on our Instagram page if you want to go and see that. But just to put it in perspective, a really high level athlete was like, whoa, like, wow. And the competitiveness, the energy, the like bonding and brotherhood, like we put out a leaderboard with like the top scores on it, and the whole unit, like as a whole, the increase in points was up. That we had no injuries during the testing. We had people saying like, this is the best that I felt going into it, and best that I felt afterwards. Like I'm fatigued, but I'm not crushed. And like leaderboard, like give me that. I want to see where I am. Give me that. I want to see where I am. But being able to celebrate the accomplishments of the unit and each individual and just their athletic performance. Oh gosh, we've been saying it was like our Super Bowl of like human performance, of just seeing this performance put on. Just incredible.
We could rant about like all the little details of how awesome it was, but maybe we'll share more in a future episode or on blogs or things like that. But it really has been such an amazing opportunity. And Kai, like, again, like go crush it as you're entering into this new career path, and the drive that you have. Like that is awesome. And other people who are listening, if you're in the military, thank you for your service, and thank you for being the athletes and the humans that you are, because it does not go unnoticed, and we are very appreciative.
Yeah, and Kai, thank you again for that question. We maybe one day our paths will cross and we'll be able to see you in person. And just be like, hey, I was the one that submitted that podcast question back a while ago. But we talk about this in the book, Hope Not Nope. How do you put doubt aside? Action, right? You have to prepare. Start preparing. Look at your physical training. Make sure you're preparing. Look at your nutrition. Make sure you're preparing. Make sure you have tools to deal with metabolic stress, because it's a highly stressful environment. So make sure that you're prepping. That will put the doubt aside and allow you to excel. And that's for anyone in any career, whether it's running, performing arts, whatever it is. Like the precision in preparation is what's going to make the difference between you and other people. So happy 4th of July.
Yeah.
USA. USA.
USA.
Have a great week, and remember, every day is not just a day to be hopeful. It's an opportunity to become hope.
The Hope Not Know podcast is meant for educational, informational, and personal development purposes only, and does not constitute any health or medical advice. If you're looking for specific advice, connect with us to work with a Hope coach. The Hope Not Know podcast shall not be liable or responsible for any loss or damage allegedly arising from any information or suggestions in this podcast.